Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for hanging in there to the policy roundtable portion. I'm Sarah Iman, ICER's president and CEO, and for the next 90 minutes, it's really my pleasure to be sitting with these experts that we've assembled to really reflect on what we've just voted on, talked about, deliberated, and discussed, which is where's the evidence taking us with this new medicine? How does it fit into the treatment paradigm? And what policy options exist for us to ensure affordable access? Before I give the policy roundtable participants an opportunity to introduce themselves, I want to tell you a little bit about the roadmap for the next 90 minutes. We're going to reflect on the votes. We'll spend some time thinking about reacting to what the independent Midwest CEPAC just voted on for the evidence around this new medicine. We're going to talk about some of the themes that have come up today already about how to ensure affordable access. And we're all going to stay focused on charting a path for that affordable access. But we're going to keep in mind some of the framing that I brought to the beginning of the meeting today, which is this is a really critical time for our healthcare system. Affordability and access have never been more in jeopardy. And all stakeholders have a social obligation to be part of solution-oriented discussions around improving that access and affordability. And what an opportunity we have in front of us from a public health perspective to address this unmet need, smoking cessation, with more options. So that's why it's really disappointing to me that the company isn't committed to being part of these public conversations. This topic is important not only because of that public health impact, but also because there's some existing insurance mandates around smoking cessation, which we're going to get into, that may impact how we think about access and affordability. So we're going to talk about all of that today, some other policy options for moving forward. And again, we're going to center what should be our guiding star, which is making sure there's affordable access for patients in the system. And so with that, it's really my pleasure to introduce our policy roundtable participants. And so if I can start with Ben. Ben, would you like to say hello, please?
Sure. Hi, my name is Ben Broder. I'm a hospitalist and regional quality leader for Kaiser Permanente in Southern California and a leader of our research program as well.
Really appreciate you being here, Ben. Thank you. Peter, thanks for being here. Great to see you.
Great to see you too, and also some familiar faces on the screen. I am Peter Glassman. I'm the chair of the medical advisory panel for the VA's Pharmacy Benefits Management Services. I'm also trained as a primary care doctor and in palliative and hospice medicine, or hospice and palliative medicine. Thank you so much. Nice to be here.
Thank you, Peter. Mike, I know some of our guests have already heard you introduce yourself, but please, again,
I
for those.
say, I know I've been a little quiet today, but I've been learning a lot and absorbing a lot. It's been a really interesting experience. Mike Hess, respiratory therapist, senior director of advocacy and regulatory affairs for the COPD Foundation, and did a lot of tobacco treatment work in my previous role in a primary care clinic.
Fantastic, Mike. Thank you. Julia Logan. Julia, welcome.
Thanks, Sarah. It's great to be here. My name is Julia Logan. I'm the Chief Medical Officer at CalPERS, which is the California Public Employees Retirement System. I oversee clinical policy, research, and our health equity efforts, among other things, including pharmaceutical. I'm also a primary care physician and trained in preventive medicine and public health.
Thank you. Hayden.
Hi, everyone. Hayden McRobbie. I'm a Professor of Population Health at Queen Mary University of London. I'm a public health physician by background, and I have a PhD in tobacco dependence and treatment. I have quite an active research program in smoking cessation and also obesity, weight management. And also have a policy background, having worked alongside the New Zealand Ministry of Health in their tobacco control program for some 12, 13 years.
Thank you for being here, Hayden. Judy. I don't know if you might be on mute, Judy. Yep, Judy, you're on mute. Can you give it another try?
So sorry.
No, don't be.
am a 17-year veteran of volunteer services for the Global Healthy Living Foundation. I am a Platinum Ambassador with the Arthritis Foundation and a member of AI Arthritis International. I am a cancer survivor and a cancer thriver. And I'm happy to be talking about this topic because I have been a smoker for 53 years and I want to quit. I need to quit.
Thank you, Judy. We appreciate you being here. For those who are just joining us, Judy may be a little difficult to hear. Let us know if we have any trouble. I'm hearing her great, but don't be shy out in the audience if we need to turn up Judy's volume. And finally, Nancy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nancy Rigatti. I am a professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School, trained as a general internist, and I direct a tobacco research and treatment center. I've spent my career trying to get clinicians and healthcare systems to do more around tobacco to address this deadly cause of death. And my conflicts, which are here, but I just think it's important that you know that I have been working with the small company called Achieve Life Sciences that has been developing this drug, cytisinicline, for AKA cytosine, for a smoking cessation indication. It's my first time working with a drug company, and it's been quite a learning experience to see what is involved in trying to get a drug FDA approved. And I'll stop there.
No, that's perfect. We're gonna touch on that, and thank you for I overlooked that all of the conflicts and potential influences on judgment for our participants are listed here. But now it is time to take down this slide so we can all see each other better as we get into the conversation part of this. Nancy, I really appreciate that point, and we're gonna weave that in today a couple of ways, which is there is a balance that exists in the ecosystem between incentivizing innovation and getting new things to market that have the opportunity to help patients and balancing the affordability of our system. And we don't shy away from sitting in that tension here at ICER. And so we're going to name that today when we need to, and we're going to talk about ways to manage that in service to affordable access. And so I appreciate that you brought up the innovation piece because that's really, really important. I really like starting the roundtable by talking about health equity, and I appreciate that's already come up a little bit today. We had some votes that were trying to touch on some equity questions. And I also want to name that in my research and the research of the team getting ready today, and this came up a little bit earlier, there are mandates as part of the Affordable Care Act that require insurance coverage of drugs for smoking cessation and other programs for smoking cessation with no cost sharing and no utilization management. We're going to explore today where that falls in our tools in our toolkit for a new therapy that's coming in. Like, is step therapy allowed? Is it appropriate? Judy has thoughts. I'm excited to hear Judy's thoughts on that. She already hinted at those a little bit earlier, and we're going to look at that. But one of the things we often talk about in the health equity section is the cost sharing and the cost sharing for patients. And I'm happy to report, I think we can kind of put that aside for this, given that there was supposed to be no cost sharing for these therapies. Mike and Judy will keep me honest if it's something we still need to highlight in our policy recommendations. But what I wanted to jump immediately to is something that we also dealt with in our work that we've done in the obesity space, which is that the stigma and bias is still real around people who smoke and the conditions that they have. And we can still do better there. And Judy, thank you already for the positive body language here, because I would like this final report to make sure we're addressing what's worked. What do we still need to do? And Mike, let me put you on the spot first here. I know that the COPD Foundation thinks about this, talks about this. Do you have any positive stories about how addressing stigma and bias has been working, opportunities for the health system to do better, intersection with the policy landscape from payers? What would you like to add on this health equity question?
Yeah, I think it's essential, and I'm glad that that is something that is coming up, especially right at the beginning, because you're absolutely right. We have there's a lot of stigmas at play here because there's the stigma of Well, I shouldn't have started smoking in the first place. And why can't I, my, mother's cousins, brothers, next door neighbors, roommate quit cold turkey and I can't. So what's wrong with me? And, then there's the after effects as you get into, having a condition like COPD and you're coughing a lot or you're on supplemental oxygen, that sort of thing. So there are a lot of stigmas out there. And really, a key part of that, and I think we've done a pretty good job of this in obesity. Actually, I'm a obesity metabolic medicine patient myself. We've done a really good job at reframing a lot of that into, well, it's not just about, putting your fork down and, moving more and things like that. It's this whole ecosystem of hormones and behaviors and everything else. And I think we see that. I think if we can move that more into the tobacco space, I think we'll have a better time with that because we have good drugs, we have nicotine replacement, we know the chemistry and the biochemistry and all that sort of thing. But I think we often overlook the mental and psychological effects of it too, whether it's stigma, whether it's peer pressure, all those sorts of, whether it's habits, rituals. So I think I think we've made progress in other conditions. I would like to see us make more in the respiratory space, but I think, that just means there's a lot of opportunity.
I love that framing. I do appreciate you also seeing the connection to the important work that's been done in the obesity space to reframe. Even in the time that ICER's been focused on obesity, which is 3 or 4 years, I've seen a shift in how people are talking about it. And so we can do this here too. Judy, I know that this comes up a lot in your volunteer advocacy. Do you have any stories of success, things that you've heard that have worked well to try to combat the stigma, whether it's coming from the community themselves or from the healthcare system? What would you like to add to this conversation?
I don't see that there's been any improvement. To be honest, um, there we live in a basically smokeless society now. You can't smoke at a restaurant. You're every once in a while you can go to a bar and they're making a pound or no, it just isn't accepted anymore. And most people don't smoke, so it's very frustrating for people that are um, who have to a society that doesn't permit smoking or are non-smoking, but it makes it harder to quit because you're passing judgment on yourself when other people are, and you aren't. Yeah. And it's been I've been through this several times. I have tried to quit. There was one time and it was because I moved to another state and I had a totally different atmosphere in a non-smoking home, and it just was a new life for me. But the cancer started, and it all came crushing back down. So you go through stages, and it takes a long time for somebody that more than 50 years to quit and stay quit because of all the stressors of life.
Yeah. Judy, that perspective is really important. We want to keep that and hold that as we talk about policy options and solutions today, because I am not aware, there are very few people who don't want to try. And that the stigma and the bias that comes from the way that the system talks about and thinks about people who smoke can get in the way of that. And so we can make different choices there in a more supportive way. Mike, thank you for raising your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to really highlight something that came up in that question and answer. It's not just the general public either. It's specifically clinicians. You know, we as clinicians have to make sure that we're addressing any kind of stigma or internal bias that we have, because we've seen that, for example, with pulmonary rehabilitation, we see that people often don't get a referral to that, even with all the evidence that it works and everything, simply because their prescriber doesn't think that that person will go through with it. Or, you know, you may have somebody who, you know, it's come up a couple of times. This person has been trying to quit, you know, 3, 4, 5 times on different, pharmacological regimens. You know, that clinician may decide that it's time to give up for a while, or, you know, things like that. So it's really important to impress upon the healthcare professionals that we have to be very conscious of that and continue to make these efforts and drive it forward.
It's a really great point. Nancy, running a tobacco treatment center, I gotta imagine this comes up. Has there been any programs, training? What has your group discovered about how to bring, I mean, you hire someone new who wants to work in this field. Maybe there's some education about how to address their own stigma and bias when it comes to treating people who smoke. Anything you want to add to this?
There are a number of programs around the country that are run by different academic centers that are doing research in this area that will train people. For example, in Massachusetts, the University of Massachusetts, which is not my institution, but is the one that we go to, that they have a 10-hour sort of learn about tobacco's treatment to start with, and then you can take a multi-day session and become a certified tobacco treatment specialist, which is actually a category of treaters that we wish we could have more of in the healthcare system. Unfortunately, mostly the healthcare insurance system does not cover their care because they're not considered clinicians. It's a long story. But in any case, these trainings always start with trying to understand people, that people are trying, and that you need to meet people where they are. I think that's what we've learned is that's been most successful, is you have to sort of find out where they're coming from and then try to move to the next step that you and they can agree on.
Sometimes it's seemingly the most simple things, because wouldn't that be a wonderful way for all of us to experience the healthcare system, no matter what problem we were bringing to the site? So let's take that as a yes, we should do that. We'll make mention of those training programs. We can hint at some of the ways that moving to different reimbursement systems that aren't fee for service and more capitated allow for some of these investments. You know, ICER's done reviews in the past of things like community health workers. Wildly cost effective, wildly effective, sometimes really hard for a health system to hire, to have enough reimbursement for. And so we can put that in that category. Similarly, I wanted to also, this might come up in some other areas, but to me, it was almost an equity and access issue. There's a really interesting growing acknowledgement of the underutilization of pharmacists in our healthcare system. And a lot of systems are starting to have clinical pharmacists on staff. There are states that are considering laws to allow pharmacists to practice at the top of their license. Kind of jump into a policy recommendation. Are drugs for smoking cessation something pharmacists should be able to prescribe? Is that something that we should be thinking about to expand access? Hayden, I love your body language, and I love it when someone ex-US is going to tell the US system what to do. I'm very excited for your answer, sir.
I think the answer is yes. At least in the countries that I've worked in, our health system's under immense pressure, and we can't rely on physicians to do everything. And really, I think we've got to be looking overall at everyone working at the top of their scope. And that's going to mean that shifting tasks, not down the line, but across the line to other professions that actually may be more accessible to people who smoke. And that's very true of pharmacists. One might argue that we could go further. And we saw a lot of this over over the COVID pandemic. Even in the US, we heard a lot of communities that were getting involved in vaccination programs. A lot of things were loosened up a little bit over that time. And I think there's any time in history, that's where we've definitely seen a pivot towards better, equitable health outcomes, although I acknowledge there was still a lot more to do there.
That's great, Hayden. And it makes me also think one of the things we did loosen as a country around the pandemic was telehealth. And the ability to get reimbursed and have access to these providers. And so I'm going to throw that out there as well. That's another way to potentially expand access. Not everybody lives within driving distance to a fabulous clinic like Nancy runs. And so what are we doing to expand access in other population and other sort of regions? And so maybe telehealth is part of that. I'm going to turn to Peter and Ben, who are in integrated delivery systems, right? And you think about this whole care. Peter, can you you want to share a little bit about how the VA approaches smoking cessation and this idea of people practicing to the top of their license? Do you think it would be educational for our audience to hear how the VA thinks about this?
Well, as far as I know, it's multifactorial.
Yeah.
Approaches it from a variety of angles. I think virtually anybody in the VA can assist somebody to stop smoking. Virtually anybody, meaning a clinician, of course,
yeah.
Who has prescribing practices or privileges. But I think the main issue is access to medications for those who wish to have them. And right now, nicotine products and varenicline are widely available. It'll be interesting to see how this new product comes on the market and where it will fit in. But by and large, it's fairly widespread. There's also there's telehealth. There is a video visit. There are video visits. There are phone clinics that will provide support to patients who are stopping. I did want to address one thing that I heard. There's lots of things I hope to address, but one of the things I do wonder whether or not, in addition to the stigma that has been out there for quite some time over the years, whether or not there's been a change in the shift of the patient attitudes who are trying to smoke. Initially, when I started many years ago in primary care, there were a lot of patients out there who knew and wanted to stop smoking. And they readily said, I would like to stop smoking. I find it difficult. I need help. Whereas nowadays, I think we see more, and again, this is anecdotal, of many patients who say, no, I don't want to stop. I'm well aware. Thank you very much. But I'm not interested in stopping right now. Now, maybe they will in the future, but I do wonder whether or not some of the attitudes have become more entrenched because we've taken, if you will, many of the patients who want to stop, and they have succeeded over time, whereas many who don't want to stop. I wonder if that is a patient population we're going to have to reach out to in a different way, or in a much more, shall we say, aggressive way to help them to get to stop smoking.
I think that's an important perspective to bring. And back to Judy's point about how we have largely shifted to a more non-smoking society in terms of like where you can smoke and the number of people who choose to smoke. I do want to throw out, and we can have this as part of the conversation in our research and in our conversations with patient and patient advocates. It was quite clear about that the higher rates of smoking in people with psychiatric disorders. And I just don't want that to be unsaid as part of the landscape. And that I think everyone on this call and most people listening will acknowledge that we haven't done a great job developing a mental health care system in the United States. And there's probably a lot of people who feel left behind by a system that hasn't addressed their psychiatric needs. And so there's a connection there that I think we want to be careful around and be acknowledging that the interconnectedness of some of the other comorbidities and other things might lead to some of the rates of smoking that we see now. Judy, please chime in.
Yes, I think we failed when we just blatantly put messages on packs of cigarettes that said this product can cause cancer or whatever. It doesn't it doesn't phase anybody until it happens to them. Um, so it is there is a need, a great need to, and this is where patient advocates come in. We we need to talk to each other, and like in my case, having two kinds of cancer that are probably connected to smoking, if I can reach out to them and tell them that I am dealing with this, I don't want you to have to deal with this. We somehow need to get to the people on a one-to-one basis, or maybe in an ad campaign on television, and let them know that this is what can happen to you. I've seen the ads that are running on TV now, and yes, they scare me. They scare me very much. And
Right.
until I actually started living with it, I didn't really understand.
Yeah, that peer support point is so important, Judy, and we're gonna weave that into some of the policy recommendations, some of the ways to reach what might be harder to reach populations. And as Peter brought up, Ben, I'm excited. I was going to turn to you in terms of how Kaiser thinks about some of the issues that you're seeing around the equity question. Go for it,
Sure. I'd like to just though respond also to a
please.
couple of things just said. I think in work I did long ago in adolescence, normative education, helping people to understand that they're not alone, that it's not the case, that well, in children and adolescents, it's, no, 30% of your colleagues or your friends are not smoking or not doing drugs. And give them the real data is really quite helpful. And I think those same principles, to Judy's point, apply here. Yes, quitting one of the most highly addictive substances we know is difficult, and many people do it, no different than you. I think that's probably a part of effective behavioral interventions. I'll also say I'm fortunate enough to be part of a tobacco cessation advisory panel for a study at UPenn that has been showing that small financial incentives, quite small relative to the amount of money we're spending on these medications, or even on the facilitated education, perhaps not on the self-directed education, actually have quite significant effects on cessation rates, prolonged, maintained cessation rates. So
That's
I just wanted to throw that out there. And
great.
then,
Anything, yeah, you want to add about how Kaiser is
yeah,
approaching this, please?
yeah, I mean, much of what Peter said would apply within our system as well. We are, for those that don't know, I mean, different regions in the country are going to be somewhat different, but the medications are available. I mean, I kind of, when I learned from these presentations and the materials about the new drug, it seems like it'll be a useful addition, although again, the cost is of great concern to us. And we would probably, try to have people try other things first. We would not go, given that there's no strong signal of increased efficacy, we wouldn't go to that as first line, probably.
Okay, we're going to get to that. So put a pin in that. We're going to get to the cost, the potential price, and some of the coverage policy options there. Julia, as I bring you in, I want to tell the audience one of the reasons I was really excited to invite CalPERS to be part of this conversation is that the employer perspective for something with a public health consequence, as well as an absenteeism, a presenteeism, that perspective is, I think, really important as we round out how we're talking about affordable access to a new medicine for smoking cessation. So thank you for bringing that perspective, but please chime in.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here and offer that perspective. I just want to go back to something Judy said about and others said about this, our society being a smokeless society, and how that could lead to more bias. in terms of, that's just something that happens with other people, or that's not an issue anymore. In California, the active smoking rate among adults, I think, is hovering around 6%. And in our employed population at CalPERS, it's around 3%, maybe even a little bit less. And so there may be some apathy that happens, that it's we've solved that public health problem. It's no longer an issue. And I was looking at, to sort of think more about this, I was looking at a report from our Department of Public Health here in California, and it said that less than half of people who smoke were advised to quit smoking.
Wow.
And so it's just something that, I know as a physician that I've been trained to do motivational interviewing and always to ask about smoking and to advise smoking, but getting to somebody's point around the fact that people who now smoke are chronic smokers and know that smoking is wrong, want to quit, but it's not sort of a top line issue for many clinicians, sort of thinking about other larger chronic issues that occur in smokers.
I think that point of apathy is really important. I think we could see that would be when it existed in a health system, when it existed in even at like a health plan. However, you just think it's sort of taken care of. You don't prioritize it. You don't think about ways to ensure that there's uptake of some of these available treatments. Final call for anything health equity related before we move on and talk about some of the votes. Anything else spurred from hearing your fellow panelists opine? Okay. It's not your final chance. Don't worry. Like health equity can weave through how we're thinking about and talking about some of these other issues. Just turning to the votes, to be honest, not largely surprising in any way in terms of how we were thinking about the evidence and looking at the evidence, that it is unanimous among our voting panel that the evidence is adequate to say cytisinicline is better than behavioral support alone. We have an open question about whether it's better than varenicline because we lack head-to-head data. And so that's a question that often comes up with a new therapy that's only compared to placebo or some sort of standard of care. And then the same sort of question, interesting to bring this up around or think about this for the use of electronic cigarettes. And we'll get to that a little bit, but that also was not a vote that sort of surprised me. So just thinking about the clinical evidence votes, maybe one of you were surprised by some of that. Was there some nuance that you wanted to offer your perspective on as we think about and write up the votes for the clinical evidence section on adults who are interested in quitting cigarettes, not the adults interested in quitting e-cigarettes quite yet? Peter, please.
Well, I was a little bit surprised that we didn't deal with the issue of nicotine replacement, particularly dual nicotine replacement, because if you look at probably the most common medication that's in use to stop or to help stop smoking, it would be nicotine replacement of some sort.
Right.
But also,
we're talking like patch plus a gum, right?
Patch,
Something like
patch
that.
plus
Okay.
a gum,
Yeah.
patch plus
Yeah.
a lozenge,
Yeah.
patch plus nasal spray.
Sure.
But in general, nicotine replacement in its myriad of dosaging and forms.
Yep.
And the reason for that is twofold. One is it's not only widely available, but it also, most clinicians and most patients know what nicotine is. And it is a natural product, going back to the natural issue that was talked about earlier. But also it's comfortable for them. They know how to use it. Many patients have used it before with success, and maybe they reverted back to smoking. But I was just curious why that wasn't brought up either as a singular entity or probably as a dual entity.
No, I appreciate that question. We covered it in the report. We talked about the evidence around nicotine energy. What we decided to do with the voting questions was stay focused on the new drug. Honestly, it was just a way to help inform. Because the other part of it is our scan of coverage policies, of clinical guidelines, standard of care. Seems like it's available pretty universally for people who want it, not terribly expensive. And so that's one of the reasons it didn't really come up in the conversation, but it's an important point to make that this is, and this did come through in a lot of our conversations with patients and with clinicians. We got to make sure the entire arsenal is available. And that's the right way to do this, is to make sure it's NRT, it's Wellbutrin, it's the Chantix. And forgive me for using brand names. Sometimes the non-clinician does that so she does not embarrass herself too much. But that's what we want to see, and the behavioral health support and all of that. So Peter, I appreciate that. We'll make sure that that kind of comes through into the policy recommendations as well. That makes sense?
It does, and certainly when I read the report, it does come out. I was just kind of surprised
that we didn't
we hadn't voted on that.
Yeah,
we haven't seen a vote on it, but that
sometimes we choose not to vote on things that we hope are very obvious. That nicotine replacement therapy should be available. So, Judy, please go ahead.
In replacement therapy, I think for some people, you need to remember that there's a visual component to smoking, and that can't be replaced by a lozenge or a patch. But a pill that is changing your internal structure is probably more effective.
I appreciate that, Judy. I think that just recognizing the ritual, the habitual piece, and that's part of the whole person approach to this. And so we'll make sure that that is also reflected in how we're capturing things. So I also wasn't too surprised that when we were trying to probe on where we thought the evidence was on the drug for quitting e-cigarettes, that the majority said we don't have enough evidence. Now, one of the votes was sort of closer, and so I think I was really struck by one of our CEPAC members saying, listen, if it works to address nicotine addiction, it should work to address nicotine addiction that comes from e-cigarettes. It's just that I think we're waiting on more data. And so again, any other reflections, anything a little different than that on the e-cigarette question? Yes, please, Hayden.
Yeah, there was an interesting, some interesting comments in that space. And if you asked me that question, I would say no. At the moment, there's not sufficient evidence to use either varenicline or cytisinicline for vaping cessation. One could argue there's not enough evidence to use NRT just because the trials haven't been done. Having said that, do we expect that these medicines wouldn't help people stop vaping? And if you ask me that question, I'd say, well, no, I would think there's some good rationale for that. No matter what we think, we need those trials because people want to stop vaping. And I run group-based treatment for helping people stop smoking. And my Tuesday group, out of 14, I have 3 people that used vaping to stop smoking. Now they want to stop vaping. And it's not for health concerns. It's because they do not like being addicted to nicotine. And so there's a real reluctance to use nicotine replacement therapy, which in their minds is just switching one to the other. Right. And so, we discuss off-label use of these other medications, which they've sort of got more sort of affinity for than some of the nicotine products. So there's a real need, and I think a real need for some good evidence in this space.
Great. Thank you for that. And then, as we were thinking of some of these other considerations that are important when insurers are thinking about coverage policy, when clinical systems like Peter and Ben's are writing their clinical policies and their guidelines for their clinicians, what are the other considerations? Universally, our CEPAC agrees there's still an unmet need. The numbers might be low. It might be 6%. It might be 3% of Julia's population, but there are still people who would like other options to help them quit smoking. We also saw sort of a degree neutral split on this is an important there's a health equity or a health disparity aspect of this in terms of some of the disproportionate numbers of in Asian Pacific Islanders, excuse me, Native Americans and Alaskan Natives who smoke. And so, we saw that vote. And then as we think about some of the others, it just was interesting to me, and we acknowledge for those who were watching the meeting today, we have lots of work to do and continue to do on the wording of some of these questions, but this idea of caregiver impact, this medicine being maybe not that important in terms of improving access because of its mechanism of action, because it's basically, an oral pill like the old one. Again, I didn't have a lot of surprises from some of these discussions, but especially looking at Judy and Mike, anything like especially in the caregiver question in terms of having a new therapy that might be more effective and that impact on caregivers. Just a little context, this question comes up a lot when we are looking at a rare condition where one parent has to quit their job in order to take care of a very sick kid. Like that's a very different scale, I think, than when people are thinking about the caregiver impact on smoking. But I don't want to miss the opportunity to have assumed incorrectly. So Mike, thanks for coming off mute. How do you guys think about this at the foundation?
Yeah, well, I think it's really important to consider how the question is constructed because it does it offer a distinct advantage to the caregiver over Chantix, which is just easier to say. No, not really. I mean, they're both a pill. It's not going to have that much of a difference. So, but does it offer a net benefit to the caregiver? Very likely. I know it came up earlier that if somebody quits smoking, then the people around them also quit smoking or cut down on their smoking. You don't have that secondhand smoke exposure. So, is it a net benefit to the caregiver? Yes. Is it a net benefit compared to the alternative? No, probably not, because it's the same kind of deal. So again, it's that context that's really critical.
Yeah. Thank you. Judy, anything you wanted to add to that?
Well, I actually totally agree with Mike. And I don't live in a smoking home. I go outside or go in when I want to smoke. So I don't have that kind of environment.
Got it.
But there are still households where more than one family member still smokes. And it's beneficial to treat both simultaneously in order for both of them and everybody in the household to benefit from the treatment.
Judy, thank you. Any other just reflections on any of the votes, context, nuance that anyone wants to offer up? Okay. It was very helpful. Thank you. Oh, Julia, did you want to chime in, please?
Oh, yeah, I was surprised, I guess, by the, there was a discussion when you all were voting about, the fact that this could be an addition to the armamentarium. I always say that word incorrectly, but, for smoking cessation, because it could be that fifth smoking attempt that really puts people into the non-smoker category. And is this drug going to be that one drug that does it? But I struggle with that because the vote and the evidence doesn't seem to support that this drug will be that one drug. But you always think, Sarah, in the beginning, you talked about this duality, the patient in front of us, and then sort of thinking about our population and affordability and what that looks like, and that tension that exists. But at CalPERS, we think along both of those same lines. And as sort of a human and a clinician, I think, well, if we put this drug on our formulary, maybe that one person will stop smoking because of this drug. Yeah. So it's just something to consider. And it's interesting to think, sometimes the evidence doesn't necessarily wholly support something like that. But is it the right thing to do?
And maybe not yet, too, right? So sometimes it's like the evidence doesn't support it yet, but directionally we think so. And that's going to be a great segue to the next point. I do want to start talking about price, cost, and access. But Nancy, please weigh in.
Yeah, I just wanted to, oh gosh, losing my,
It happens to the best of us. I can
yeah,
fill for you for a minute while you're thinking, or I'm happy to go to Peter and come back to you.
um, sorry, go ahead.
I'll go back. I will go to Peter. Peter, please.
It actually happens to involve Nancy, so maybe it'll.
Okay,
I was
I'll try to remember what you asked.
I was I went back and looked at Orca 2 and Orca 3 at the patient characteristics. And one of the interesting things, and going back to what Judy was saying and what others, maybe Mike, was the number of quit attempts that people have tried in the past. And one of the things that I take away from this, um, and also it pertains to my own personal experience with smoking, which I'll get to in one sec, um, is that there were, roughly speaking, I think 4 attempts on each side. So
Yeah,
each time we try a new technique or even use perhaps an older medication, we take an incremental portion of that population and get them to stop smoking. At least that's what the studies have shown, which I think is really important to understand. It may not be so much the exact drug, that there's one drug that's going to be
mhm.
the universal stopper, if you will, particularly when Julia points out that only a very small proportion are left smoking. But it may be that it's the increment. And by the way, Judy, I just wanted to say, in a lot of ways, you remind me of what happened to my dad. My mother and father both smoked when I was young. And my mother just woke up one morning when she's in her 30s somewhere and said, "That's it. I'm not smoking anymore." She's 95 right now, and she hasn't smoked in I don't 60 some odd years. My father, on the other hand, who was involved in healthcare, he was an orthodontist, um, tried many times. I think he tried any number of non-medication ways to do it, as well as however. And I don't even know. I can't even ask him. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. I don't know how or why he stopped, but he too made it to 95. So, but it took a long time. And I think he didn't stop until I want to say in his 60s. So it was a struggle. And so I hear you and appreciate what you're saying and greatly respect the difficulty that it must be for you and others to stop.
Thank you, Peter. All right, Nancy, anything prime?
Yeah,
Go.
I have two things to say. So
Please.
in response to what Peter said, I think that with quitting smoking is a matter of a pharmacological change and a behavioral change. And each quit attempt for any single person is not the same. And sometimes it's at a different time in their life. So it may not always be that it's the drug that makes a difference. It may be the situation that somebody is in. And it's sort of, I always use the analogy with patients that it's like learning to ride a bicycle. You fall off a few times and then you eventually can learn. So so in ARCA 2 and ARCA 3, I was surprised. We didn't know what to expect in terms of people who would come in and how much they'd tried to quit in the past. But I was actually not surprised to see that there were people who had made a lot of quit attempts. Almost everybody had already tried NRT. Many people had used the other drugs as well without success. I think that what has happened is that there hasn't been anything new in the smoking cessation space for 20 years in the United States. So it's generated a lot of what people now call clinical inertia about doing something about a problem, because there's nothing exciting about it anymore. Whereas if you're talking about diabetes or hypertension, there's a new drug, not every week, but it feels like pretty often. And there's always something more to talk about. We don't have anything new. And why I think that this particular drug will be helpful if we have something new. I think the drug itself has value because it has a mechanism of action that makes sense. It has a history that's good. The data looks good. And I think it's really important that we'll have something new available that will bring people in. When we first had varenicline or Chantix on the market, it brought people in, and more people were trying to quit until they got scared about the psychiatric concerns, which turned out to be not real. And so I think, having something new will be very helpful.
Nancy, I appreciate that point. We'll make sure we put that into the policy recommendations because sometimes there are these other external factors that like have follow-on effects. And so a tobacco treatment center, a primary care office, an integrated system that has, yes, maybe some of that inertia of, well, the patient I've had for 20 years who's a smoker, I tried all the things and it didn't work. And so I mean, that's why I think that unmet need vote that you saw was sort of unanimous, agree, because we still have people who want to quit who have difficulty doing that. All right, we're going to shift to cost, price, and access. I know that's why you're all here. I mean, so let's talk a little bit about like where we're seeing things. Okay, the first thing to acknowledge and to put it right out there is we have no idea how much Achieve Life Sciences is going to charge for this drug. We have analyst estimates, we have people who have some guesses about what it might be. But we do know how much Pfizer charged for Chantix when it launched it 20 years ago. So I went and I looked that up. A month's supply was about $500. It was about $1,500 for a course of treatment. If you inflation adjust that to 2026 dollars, guess what? It gets close to being at the lower end of the ICER benchmark range for what a fair price is. Wouldn't you know it? And so maybe Pfizer picked a value-based price all those years ago, even before ICER was around to tell them they should. And so I'm putting that out there as this isn't necessarily about competing with the generic price for Chantix. That would be nice. And from a public health perspective, I think all of us who think about budgets would love that. But this did take investment and risk for this company to run these trials and then go for FDA approval. We want some signal in the system that encourages companies to do that. And that's why we think about our benchmark price as being the price that incentivizes that innovation by matching the price to the benefit. So I'm going to put that out there, that there's one way we can achieve a dual goal of access and affordability is we can think about the health benefit benchmark price. We'll leave budget impact for a little bit because right now treating patients with generics is cheaper. And so if we're going to add new expense, that is money that needs to come from somewhere. It doesn't mean it can't, but we also are all aware of how much trouble we're having in the affordability of our health insurance right now. What I wanted to kind of put forth and get some reactions to, acknowledging that I think there's some nuance here that I could even learn, that I definitely could learn some more about, is that the Affordable Care Act says treatments for smoking cessation approved by the FDA need to approve with no cost sharing for patients and no utilization, no prior authorization, I believe is the word, no PA. So can we do step therapy and does that make sense? I know Judy's answer, so we're going to go to Judy in a little bit, but I mean, there is a scenario you could see a payer in front of them go, okay, you have to try varenicline because it's generic. If you've tried it and it doesn't work, or if you have a reason that you really don't want to try it, maybe you don't have to. But is that a reasonable thing for the system to be thinking about if this new drug gets approved? Hayden, love the facial expression. Let's
All
go.
right. I'm sorry, you know what I'm going to say, don't you?
Not at all. I want to hear
and
it.
look, and you can, say, oh, that's different because he's, outside of the US. But I totally
No,
agree.
we believe everything you say because of your accent. I think you should understand that.
I totally agree with Judy here that we shouldn't place additional barriers in front of people and make them jump through hoops. I always remember my old boss, who Nancy knows quite well, who always says to me, failure breeds failure. We don't do this in obesity treatments. We don't, well, maybe we used to, but we don't anymore. And I think we've moved right past that. So no, I don't think it should be stepped. When you've got evidence of efficacy, it should be a first line treatment. And I just want to say one thing, if I may, Sarah, before I forget, because the whole pricing baffles me, but I do understand that there are development and research and development costs. But you've got some quite stark differences. Nancy raised before that the cytisinicline that I use here in the UK costs £115, $150. In Poland, it's even cheaper than that. We're talking about 10 to 20 euros. But I also I've just been reflecting on this because we've had cytisinicline available in the UK since 2024. No one knows about it. And I was
Well,
reflecting on how people get to know about this stuff. And actually, it's the pharmaceutical industry that drives this change. They're the ones that go and visit all the physicians. They're the ones that put ads in
yeah.
wherever they put advertisements. And so there is a little bit of a balance in all of this that I get it. There needs to be some profit, some funds that are out of this to promote it. And that's one thing I've definitely not seen in the UK. And I have to work a lot harder in explaining all these products. No one's coming to me saying, I want to use cytisinicline.
Right.
So there
Because
you go.
no one's heard of it. Yeah, I mean, there's people who have lots of thoughts and feelings about direct-to-consumer advertising to physicians, but there's also data out there that show it does raise awareness, and whether or not there's a net health benefit of that raised, right? Because there might be a lot of patients, and I'm talking outside of smoking cessation now, with some of the others who might ask for a brand when there's a generic that works. That's absolutely, part of the context. We were having internal conversations here as a team. And this is not something that happens that often when ICER does a review, that this is effectively a molecule that's been used for 50 years in Europe, right? So like we have a very good understanding of its safety profile, its efficacy, all those things. And so for Achieve Life Sciences, the only option they could see in the US was to run clinical trials and apply to the FDA as a new molecular entity and get the exclusivity that way, which comes with a lot of costs. Wouldn't it have been cool if there was another pathway to bring this drug here, given that all of these other agencies had looked at it and all those things? So I don't know exactly what that is. I know that there's this new, it's not quite right. There's a non-prescription drug product with additional condition for non-prescription use thing that the FDA is thinking about. I'm not saying this necessarily needs to be non-prescription, but I mean, we can get any supplement we want, seemingly, without FDA regulation. There should be a middle ground, is kind of what I'm throwing out there. So that's something you can all think about and react to as we think about sort of this cost and access piece, and whether there was another way potentially to do this that would not necessarily have perpetuated or necessitated a very high price in order to have some sort of incentive for a company to bring it to market, given the investment they needed to make. Ben, thank you for bearing with me during my long-winded tangent.
Hey, soliloquies are important. Um, yeah, I just want to come back to a point Julia made before, which is the struggle as a prescriber, and you made it too, the patient in front of you versus the system. So,
Yeah,
a statement was made, Hayden said, well, we can't, no, maybe someone before that, we shouldn't have any barriers to any of the treatments. And yet, if we don't, in my system, the bulk of it, we wouldn't actually put step therapy in place, but we would encourage the clinicians to essentially do that. In other parts, we would do step therapy. If we don't do that, those $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 per patient is, how many vaccines that I can't buy and how many, right? And for us, it's really truly in one system. It's very apparent. And even if it's not that system, it's part of the healthcare costs that are continuously rising and already unaffordable. So
that
I
point's important.
struggle with that, even though the burden of suffering from tobacco is so huge. But I still struggle.
It's not the only priority in front of us in the healthcare system, and that's okay to say out loud. I mean, that is the tension that we all bring to thinking about how to bring the most health to the most patients in an affordable way. Sorry, second soliloquy, or maybe it's my fifth. I mean, that to me is I mean, it's why you're all here. It's why we have these public meetings, because it's okay to say that out loud. In an ideal world, it would be great if we didn't need step therapy. It would be great if we could just have the physician, prescribe anything available. But because, and this is, based on our now 20 years of doing this, 70% of the time, manufacturers are picking prices well above their value. And that has put strain on the healthcare system year after year. And if we had been paying value-based prices in pharmaceuticals and other aspects of what we do, we might not be here going, oh gosh, I wonder if I need to do step therapy on this, just because if I've got 1,000 patients who come in and it's going to be $3,000 or it's going to be $5,000, that's going to put a real strain on my budget. Nancy, thank you for waiting.
Sure. So I wanted to talk about step therapy too, because I've been a prescriber long enough that I remember the days when, in order to get to prescribe nicotine replacement when it was not over the counter but only prescription, you first had to go to you fail a behavioral program, and that was just ridiculous. And so I'm very much against the idea of having this step care. I think the way that the insurers are doing it now is essentially by having different copays. So, for example, if this goes on the market and is covered by insurance, it will not have a generic copay. It will have a brand name copay. So people will be strongly incentivized to be prescribing probably varenicline, which is essentially the same medicine with a few more side effects, probably. We don't know for sure. We still need the perfect evidence, but in the meantime, that's probably where it's going to sit. And so what we'll need is to, that's how we're going to control it, I think. And it's unfortunate because I would like this drug, which I think is great, to go to lots of people. I wish that there was some way to get the insurers to make a case to the insurers that actually, if they priced it lower, they'd sell so much more that they would actually come out better. There's probably
Love that. No, Nancy, that's the volume play I talk about all of the time. I'm going to do a little bit of a thought exercise, not in smoking cessation, because of something we're going to bring up in a second about how the ACA mandates here, I think, make things a little more weird. But yes, in a traditional setting, an existing drug that's generic, that's accepted by clinical experts as a pretty good first-line therapy, you'll have a $10 copay, and the new drug, you're going to have a $50 copay because it's more expensive. That's one way the health insurance system controls costs. And I have often made the argument, especially given that our research is showing it's about 70% of the time that manufacturers are overreaching on price, which then creates that reaction in the health insurance system to put up the barriers to do the step therapy, the prior auth, or the cost sharing is, if you lower the price, don't you make it up in volume? So yes, you charge less per, but aren't we all just working towards a revenue goal here that we can get a couple of different ways? But bringing it back to this, my research said that insurance companies are not allowed to charge a copay for these drugs for smoking cessation. But Nancy, it sounds like maybe they are, because you're probably seeing it in your practice. But let me go to Mike while you think about that, because Mike, I know your group does a lot of work on the policy side. Is that something that's supposed to be happening that's not?
Well, I want to turn it back just a notch, and because it's weirdly not necessarily true that a generic is going to be cheaper. And we've seen that.
That's also true. That's correct. Yes.
Specifically with albuterol is a great example here in Michigan. It is cheaper to get a brand name inhaler of albuterol than it is to get a generic, because the drug companies then provide rebates to not the insurance company, but their pharmacy benefit manager. And then you get into this whole dark side snake's nest of, who's paying who and who's getting a better deal. And so theoretically, we would be able to manage that with the different levels of copay. But then let's say this manufacturer comes to a drug, a PBM, and says, well, we're going to give you this rebate and it's going to work like this. And then all of a sudden that's lower than the generic with the larger body of evidence and so on and so forth. And so then now this brand new drug becomes the preferred drug. And so it's not even necessarily where they may set the, don't want to get too conspiracy theory, but they may set the price higher so that then there can be rebates and then there's cost incentives and all that sort of thing. So it's really, and that's why there's increasing legislation to reform these PBMs, because they make everything so opaque and so complicated that it's really hard to figure out where we are with utilization review.
Yeah. But Mike, have you seen anything, or maybe I relied incorrectly on my Google search on this and was reading about the ACA requirement that smoking cessation be available with no cost sharing. Is that something that
It's not something that's been brought up a lot, and
that's
like I said,
interesting?
it's been a few years since I've been in direct practice,
Yep.
so I would
Sure.
have to defer
Okay.
on that. But
Yeah.
it doesn't seem to be a complaint that we're hearing a lot.
Okay. That's great. So Nancy, back to you. I just wondered if that was your patients have co-pays for these therapies.
I think that people do have the copays because
Huh.
if you, yeah, I
Yeah.
think so, but I
Okay.
could be wrong. I
All
could be
right.
wrong.
We'll dive a little deeper into it for our policy write-up to make sure that we're understanding that. I wasn't going to ask Ben or Peter this because I knew you guys do cost sharing in completely different ways, like everything's $10 or something like that. So it's probably it's a little bit. But Peter, please help me out if you can.
Well, let's go back. I think it's instructive to go back to a couple things. By the way, as an aside, the VA DoD clinical practice guideline for tobacco use and cessation or tobacco use treatment just came out this week, I
Oh,
believe. Or at
great.
least I just received it this week, and I'm still going through it. But it is interesting to note that they talk very little. There is some discussion about citizenacline, but not much. That said, if we just go back and look at the evidence, where does this drug sit right now,
Right.
as as much as we know, which is we know at least based on the two ORCA trials that it works best probably when given in 12 weeks. We know that it works as others have with previous attempts, so it's an incremental change to that patient population. We know that it has, not from ORCA, but from other sources, we know that it has long use in Europe, albeit in different dosing and different methods. And we know that it's slightly different from varenicline in terms of its origin. Uh, what are the other things that we know? Sort of cons in a way. We know that we only have data for 12 weeks with the 3 times a day, 3 milligrams 3 times a day. We don't really know how to optimally use this drug yet. We also know that it's probably going to be it's either going to be more expensive than the other agents. We don't know. I do take the point. It would be nice if companies realized that volume could easily make up for the cost. But that said, what we don't know now is we don't know how much it's going to cost. And then finally, I just want to mention that as an ethical construct, there are other ethics in medicine besides the usual ones that we have, first do no harm, etc., which are the more population-based ones, one of which is parsimony. And parsimony says that when you have a inexpensive agent that will achieve an outcome versus an expensive agent that will achieve an outcome, you're not practicing parsimony if you go with the expensive one for no particular reason other than you want to. So then lastly, I just want to point out again something we touched on earlier, which as one of the pros or cons, you can call it what you will, this is a new agent. That's a good thing. We have a new agent. I think we all agree that that's a good thing. However, as I think it was Hayden pointed out, there's people don't have experience with this drug. They're not even asking for it in the UK, apparently. Um, People feel comfortable with and have the knowledge of the side effect profile as well as the benefits of varenicline and nicotine replacement
Mm-hmm.
therapy, which,
Yeah.
by the way, the VA DoD guideline, which I have on my other screen here, emphasizes. So it's not that it doesn't have a place, it's just that it's not clear where that place should be. And the comfort level and experience, as well as the cost, most likely push us toward traditional therapies, assuming that there's no reason that you shouldn't try them.
Yep. I appreciate that perspective. I think that's fair in the framing of all of the goals that we're trying to achieve. It is both helping Judy have another option to help her quit smoking, as well as having a health system that is still serving the needs of our entire population. I think you've hit on some of the things that we think about a lot in terms of that tension. Julia, please.
Yeah, just getting back to sort of the cost share and access, at CalPERS, we offer a very broad access to smoking cessation services. And I don't think that's because we're special. I think it is because of the ACA. We offer counseling and screening and medications and several quit attempts per year.
Yes.
That being said, these services are extremely underutilized.
Yeah.
I think we spent about $1.5 million last year on smoking cessation medications, which is
You want to put that in context for people.
right. I mean, it's just a fraction of a percent of our total drug spend. I mean, like minuscule.
Minuscule.
So, maybe instead of focusing on adding a new drug, which may or may not be the right clinical thing to do, I think it's also important that we think of the underutilization and what we policymakers can do to increase utilization, increase access in broader ways beyond just adding another drug.
Thank you, Julia. Hayden, I'll go to you in 1 second because I'm giving everybody a warning. In about 10 minutes, I'm going to give you all the opportunity to have a final call to action based on everything you've heard today, everything that we've talked about in the policy roundtable. And it can be to tell someone to do something. It can be very directed, but I want you all to start thinking about what that final call to action might be as we look at the last few minutes of our time together here. But Hayden, please go ahead.
So, thank you. And just to circle back, and Peter, look, I absolutely agree with the principle of parsimony. I'm, Scottish heritage. Of course, I'm super conservative with spending. And look, I guess this might all come down to as where the price is when it comes to market and where that lands. But I guess too, just to circle back to a point Nancy made very early on in our discussion, that these drugs for smoking cessation are not just an aid, but a new drug to market is also that motivator. So it's not like an antibiotic in that way where you just prescribe, I suppose, the most effective and probably cheapest. It's what we're told to do anyway here, that you have. And you've got lots of people, of course, that have tried many times and many products, and this kind of will be that chance. So I get it, and I absolutely think we should be trying to get the best value for money, but balancing all of these things at the same time is probably important too.
I appreciate that, Hayden. We've talked a couple of things that we have touched on in terms of like future research needs, but I'd love to give everyone an opportunity to say, like, where would you want to see more data, more information? A few things came up today: younger populations, patients using e-cigarettes who want to quit, or potentially chewing tobacco pouches. Can I hear from all of you? Like, if you could, thank you, Nancy, wave your magic wand for you want future research on X.
Well, I think the next step for this drug will be to see how it performs in actual clinical practice without the extensive behavioral support, and see how well it does. It should probably still be more effective than placebo, but it would be useful to have a better estimate of what that would be.
Yep.
I think that beyond that, then we need to think about how is it going to perform in groups that were not in the clinical trials, or in groups that were underrepresented in the clinical trials. And especially we've talked about people who have other comorbid substance use, or we could talk about people with serious mental illness, or even not so serious mental illness. We could, so that's another example. There are other groups, people with HIV, who are living with HIV, who have a really difficult time quitting and smoke at high rates. There's lots of different groups, low-income population. So there's lots of groups that the question will be, how well does it work in that population? Now it's not like we should say, we're not going to use it. We're not going to use it in those people. Sure, we're going to use it in those people, but it would be nice to know for sure that it works well.
Thank you. Let me go. Hayden, you get the next bite at the future research needs apple.
Okay, so carrying on from that, I think we all know behavioral support works in helping people stop smoking, and a good chunk of this is helping people use the medication as well as they possibly can. And when you've got slightly tricky dosing regimens, and even 3 times a day, you might argue is still a little bit tricky to do over a 3-month period. What can we do more of to make taking the medication easy, advising on adverse effects, encouraging people to carry on even if they slip? And I think we're going to see more in the way of AI. It's going to get better and better, and soon we won't need humans to necessarily sit down and spend a whole lot of time doing this. So that's where I'd put my money into some research to see how we can get more once these products come to market.
Thank you. Peter, future research needs? Any to add?
Yeah, well, I agree, actually. I think Nancy's point, how this is going to perform in a real life population. And I think in that sense, Kaiser, Ben and the Kaiser group and the VA will be very instructive because we have an enclosed system. The other thing, of course, is we have a drug that's been tested against placebo, and we don't know how it's going to perform in a real life RCT, if you will, or an RCT against other well-known products, particularly in a similar patient population who have probably had multiple attempts to quit. So that would be very instructive and very helpful to know.
Thank you. Ben, future research needs.
Oh, I won't repeat. I think I'll circle back to, this idea I mentioned very briefly in the first time I spoke about the idea of small monetary. It's a very unusual, controversial, maybe intervention, and there is a research base for it, but I don't think it's well known. And of course, how you would do it, I think, is problematic, probably because of some of our regulations about how insurance companies work and so forth.
Great, thank you. Julia, any future research needs to add?
You started out the conversation really focusing on health equity, and I think that might be an area, really focusing on groups who are most impacted by smoking and serious mental illness. It was mentioned already, but I probably would vote for that.
Perfect. Mike, what would you like to see future research needs wise?
I'm another vote for finding specific populations that there might be a significant benefit. We saw, 10 years ago, there was a round of trials where they took all the asthma biologics and tried them in the COPD population without much success, broadly written. And then now we're finding that, there are certain subpopulations like frequent exacerbators and stuff where they are very effective. So, looking back 10 years, we kind of gave up on them, but now they're back in because we did find that particular subset. So I think that's going to be key for this med.
Mike, I love that for many reasons. I loved all your answers, by the way. I'm not picking a favorite. But what I appreciate about that is when we think about the cost and the budget impact, one of the reasons that there tends to be a reaction to a high cost medicine for a patient population when we don't have a lot of data on exactly which patients are going to do best is the idea that you would try it and it might not work. So the more data we have about the populations for whom this will be the most effective treatment, it becomes a lot easier to say no step therapy. And oh, by the way, you might even be able to charge a higher price because we know it's going to work better. And then we're not going to anyway. So I think that's a great one that we can put in. Judy, do you have any research needs that you would like the community to be thinking about from a patient perspective?
No, I don't. Actually, okay. I think that having a new product at this point in time is beneficial.
More options. I hear you.
I actually would like to ask Hayden a question about.
Please, absolutely. And then I'm going to come back to you for our first call to action, but go right ahead. You can talk to Hayden.
This, you said, has been in Europe for 50 years, correct?
Yeah.
And it has, what does the data say there? that it is an effective drug?
I mean, yes, we have data from trials that have been undertaken in the EU. Some of the earlier studies were out of Poland. We've got studies from New Zealand. There are two randomized controlled trials from New Zealand, one comparing cytisinicline with nicotine replacement therapy, the other comparing it with varenicline, and another one from Australia. But just the slightly different dosing regimen, Judy. It's the really complex one where you take one tablet every 2 hours for the first 3 days, and then you reduce the dose over time. But essentially, we have data already. Yes, there's lots more that we could look at, and there are lots of specific subpopulations that we should be looking at. But from an outsider point of view, and I know things are different in the US, but I would say we've got some pretty good data already.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to be honest, most of the medications that trials in other countries before they've come to us, I'm on a number of them myself.
Mm-hmm.
So I trust the data. I don't care where it comes from.
I love that, Judy. We might put that in the report. Judy, you got the first word here as a call to action. If you wanted someone to do something, if you wanted there to be a change to how things are now, this is you waving your magic wand around access to therapies for smoking cessation. What would it be?
Oh, I would like to have this available as soon as possible. And I'd like to have it covered by insurance, obviously. And if my magic wand works, I'll be able to try it myself.
I think all of us can stipulate on this call that we would wave our magic wand so that you have the ability to try it as soon as it comes out. But Mike, you get to wave your magic wand next.
I would say that again, clinicians need to remember to check their biases and their prejudices and stigmas as they're deciding on these treatment options. And I would add to that, we need to make sure that we are providing a comprehensive approach. It's not just C versus V. It's and nicotine replacement and behavioral therapy and social support and all of these things. And it's not easy to do, but that's really providing that individualized approach is really what's going to make a huge difference in success rates.
Thank you. Peter, wave your magic wand, please.
Well, I have to go to get my Harry Potter wand out of their cabinet, don't I? I only wish I had one. I think at this point, I saw a sidebar from Tim Wilt earlier, but looking at this from a systems point of view, I think there are twofold things to try to figure out. One is where is its niche going to be? How is it going to fit in with the other agents and other methods for stopping smoking? And two, we really are rather hamstrung at the moment until we see the cost of this agent so we can look at value. And I think over time, the value of this drug will become more apparent one way or the other as we learn about its use, its niche, as well as we see further research done in that area, particularly against other agents that can hopefully stop smoking for people. So that's it.
Thank you, Peter. That's great. Ben, next to you, your magic wand.
Yeah, well, I really want to double down on what Mike said and sort of say that, I think, frankly, a dollar spent on educating and encouraging clinicians to address this, not fall victim to the same fallacy we're telling the patients not to fall victim to. I mean, the clinicians face this in right, so they don't ask people about getting COVID vaccines because they don't want to deal with it. They don't want to talk about obesity because they don't want to deal with it. That's changing some, with more effective treatments. But to me, I think it's probably true that if we would spend a dollar on that part of it, we would probably get more value, to Peter's point, than a dollar spent on any other intervention. Although that does presuppose to some extent that, as Mike had mentioned also, that we have access to the multimodal interventions. One size doesn't fit all.
Thank you. As an organization that does not shy away from difficult conversations, we also know that people shy away from difficult conversations, and that's just part of human nature, and that happens in the doctor's office. It's absolutely true. Julia, waving your magic wand next.
Yeah, so it's hard for me to think about value of this particular drug at this point. But in general, sort of as a result of this conversation and all of what we've been thinking about, I would say that purchasers like CalPERS and others should treat tobacco like it is the leading cause of preventable death. I think that's not something that we necessarily see clearly, and really to focus on the underutilization, the apathy, making sure that health equity is addressed.
Love that. Thank you so much. Nancy?
Well, I would agree with above, actually, with especially what Julia just said. But I would say I think this drug, I hope I'm not going to jinx it, but I think it's on its way to approval. It seems like the case is good. I hope that it doesn't cost as much as some people think it's going to cost. I hope that it will be used widely, that it will start to clear out the clinical inertia and make people excited. It's been my experience working when I've given CME talks to primary care doctors to tell that everyone is very excited about the idea of a new medicine coming, even if they end up prescribing something else, just if it gets them to start working. So I hope, my hope is that it will reinvigorate healthcare systems to take tobacco seriously, and our clinicians to work harder with the patients.
Love that. And Hayden, giving the best accent, the final magic wand.
Okay, well, I'm going to say that we've got to be careful not to see this, of course, as a magic cure in all of this. And I'm going to put the challenge out there that this needs to be seen as part of a comprehensive tobacco control approach. And this covers everything from prevention through to cessation. And I acknowledge that a lot of states are doing very well in tobacco control, but I think it's probably also fair to say that there's a lot more that we could collectively do to do better for people who smoke.
I think that's a beautiful way to wrap up, because I think we've acknowledged that it is true that a new thing can raise attention for some of the old stuff that we did. And as we think about our comprehensive approach, as we think about bringing down the stigma, I think that could be a really wonderful thing that happens to this. And I will add and wave my magic wand that pricing to value sends a signal to the system that you are a responsible actor towards a public health goal of reducing the rates of smoking. And that is something within the control of the manufacturer of this product, because they are the ones who will pick the price. And so that's a role that they can play in ensuring that Judy gets access as soon as this is approved, which we are all going to be checking with Judy in a couple of months after the PDUFA date. All right, this has been an absolute pleasure. I thank you all for spending this time with us, adding your expertise and your perspective to this really important question. And it's my pleasure to invite the Midwest CEPAC back on camera and to have Jill lead us through some final reflections from our meeting today. Thank you all.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay, I guess we should start with Jayani.
Hi, yes. So I think the question was interesting, definitely, and listening to the clinical experts as well as the patients is very interesting, and it was sort of learning and experience. But I think the drug that we discussed today in terms of I feel like, again, the clinical trials that have been conducted compared to what it would be when it comes out in the market, I think that's what sort of drove my decisions in voting. If that is something you want me to talk about, yes. So sort of, yes, like as I think Nancy also brought it up, like how would it work in the real world? Sometimes because in these control settings, things tend to work, but sometimes when it goes out in the real world, in the market, it doesn't really work the same way as in clinical trials and control settings. So that was sort of my take in terms of voting on this drug. I'm not quite clear what else I'm supposed to answer, Sarah. Do you want me to?
No, that's fine. We just wanted you
That's
to have
fine.
any last reflections that you wanted to have is great.
Yeah,
So
I mean, I think in terms of future, I think it is important to think about. I mean, having options is an important thing. I think also like looking into the cost-effective treatment options for smoking cessation is the key. So I think we're all interested in learning about the price point for this drug and, compared to other existing drugs in the market, how this drug is going to be cost-effective and effective in terms of treatment as well as cost-effective. So that's what I'm interested in looking forward to learning.
I agree with
Future.
that. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thanks.
Heather?
Yeah, I would just really, to me, the most important thing that I wanted to really say is Judy, thank you. Any other patient in the room, all the patient panelists who participated. I'm particularly sensitive to your input above all else. It is not easy to get up and talk about lived experience, no matter what the topic, and the fact that you're all willing to do so is just so really appreciated. I know that the patient story is really at the heart of what we do, and innovation is always important. I always want to see new devices, new drugs, new products brought to the market. I want them to benefit as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. But I also want to be cognizant and prudent about affordability, equity, access, and evidence of value in the real world. I really appreciate the process that goes on here. And I'm very, very grateful to be part of this particularly, really critically, personally important topic. So thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Ingiv?
Yeah, thanks. This was another really enlightening and interesting discussion. I don't think there's any problems with efficacy. Sure, effectiveness is always an issue. I think I will see how it will work. I'm hoping that they will come in with a price point that they can keep the momentum. If the price point is too high, they won't have momentum and people will forget about it. Particularly larger health systems that have capitated cost. If you come in with that, double the price of any existing generic, I think it's going to be really, really difficult for them to place it. So that's my hope. Thanks again for having me.
Thank you. Don?
Yes. Can you hear me, Jill?
No, we can't hear you.
Oh, sorry.
I can hear your voice now, but when I thought there was a blank.
Why don't we invite John? John, if you want to put something in the chat, because we know you're in transit, that way we can read it out loud after we go through. Is that okay, Jill? We'll keep going.
Yeah, that's great. We'll go on to Kurt.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the fascinating and interesting insights. I feel like we're kind of at the tip of the iceberg. We're getting some good information around this drug, but yet there's a lot more research that could be done. I was also intrigued by the comments about the pharmacist's increasing role, obviously, as well as potential AI use, particularly for the behavioral support. I think more therapeutic options for treating smoking cessation is good, and fair pricing and access.
Uh-oh, you've frozen.
We lost Kurt.
Kurt,
yeah.
We lost you.
I think we got the gist of it. We'll let Kurt also add it in chat if needed. Okay.
All good things. Okay. Bijan had to leave a little early, so he's not with us now. But Alan? Is Alan with us?
Yeah, sorry. It just took me a second to come off mute. I think Judy said it best. So I'll just reiterate what she said, and that Well, I think we long have known that getting people to not smoke and helping those stop who have started is probably the most important thing we can do from a public health perspective. It's not only short term, but over long term savings. So that's never really been in question. So any new tool that we can put out there that adds to the mix of things that people have access to work that solution, I think is helpful. And again, it is important. Obviously, it's not a one size fits all approach, and there's not a magic bullet. And this is a recovery and treatment that requires multiple types of tools interlapping and changing over time to truly get to complete cessation. But that's the point, right? Adding another thing to it is essential. Now, price matters, of course, and I'm hopeful and I believe that the price probably will come in at a level that makes sense, but you never know. But I appreciate the conversation, all the comments, and of course bringing this issue to the ICER table to allow us to talk about it. And again, demonstrate its importance, but also demonstrate the importance of price when we think about access and affordability on such an important issue is always critical. So thanks to the ICER team, thanks for all the panelists, and in particular, thanks so much to Judy.
Thank you. Agreed. Eric?
Thanks. Great session. Two things come to mind. Number one is just a reminder today of our society, right? The American society, the Europeans, other people in the world allow this addictive product to be manufactured and sold to our people, right? So it's a highly addictive product that we as a government and our society said it's okay that our people get addicted to this. And now we spend resources and effort and new technology unaddicting them to something that we've allowed. And that's in many ways the price of our ability to have products like this on the market. I just want to underscore just how addictive this product is and why it's so difficult to get people off of it. And having more options is important. I think on the economic analysis side, I guess one thing I think about, I just sort of surface, is that a pack a day in the United States costs about $10, right? So it's about what it costs, right? So if you think about if somebody is smoking a pack of cigarettes a day, they're spending on average $300 a month to fuel that addiction. Maybe if they're smoking less, it's half that amount, but it's an expensive addiction. And it was something that came up, but I'm not sure. It was something that stuck with me of like when we're able to stop smoking, there's a direct economic benefit that's accrued by the individual patient in this particular case. And there are societal benefits, there are direct and indirect health benefits, but there's an unusual direct economic benefit to the addict, to the addicted person in this case. So just a couple observations, not really part of the full picture, but two things that I take away from today's session. Thanks.
Thank you, Eric. Tim Wilt?
Thanks. I think this session really highlighted that tobacco and smoking are bad. Prevention and treatment are good, but challenging. And it has great, as Eric just mentioned, clinical and economic benefits. I found myself really agreeing and getting great insight from our policy roundtable people. I think, and I thank Dr. Rigotti for doing the trials. We need more. I think this works. It's where is it going to fit in the niche? And as I think one of the other folks said, it's also a big price point, as well as finding out a little bit about more where it fits in the niche with folks, including those who have failed varenicline in the past, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you very much.
Rachel?
Sure. So like my colleagues, I'm always so appreciative of all the work by the ICER team and the stakeholders and patient advocates here with us today. So first, thank you. We often hear that the high price of a new drug is needed to compensate for the risk, the expense, the time to bring a new drug to market. And something that's come out in the conversation today is that those factors maybe aren't present here in the same way as they are for some other products, right? This is a closely analogous compound, if not the same compound. It's been on the market for many years, so the risk of running trials should be much lower than if it's a completely new mechanism of action or molecule. And the manufacturer has a priority voucher from FDA designed to really, really speed the approval process. So if you think that the price of a drug is being driven by those types of concerns, it would be really reasonable for stakeholders to ask and expect the lower risk, the lower approval time to be reflected in the announced price. And I'll be looking forward to seeing what that is.
Good points. Thank you. Reem?
Yes, well, as my colleagues, I want to start by thanking ICER team and everybody for really a well-run session. Data that has been presented, extremely organized, both the clinical and cost effectiveness analysis. I'm gonna kind of use some of the same lines that have been used. This is a rare situation where we're likely to have a win-win situation, both direct benefit, health-wise, but also economically on the individual and the society. But it would be a real shame if people cannot get this as an additional tool to what is needed in the complex toolbox, the comprehensive toolbox that we need to try and deal with tobacco addiction. So I do hope that it's priced and it's priced correctly, so it's accessed by a lot of people. The one thing I want to also mention is tobacco comes in all kinds of forms. A lot of people are thinking about cigarettes. Hookah is a big thing in the world. There are all kinds of actually increase tobacco use in all different socioeconomic status, different age groups, in addition to vaping. So I do hope we mention that in the report, because people who smoke different kinds of things, it's all tobacco, don't consider themselves smokers, which is another thing that we have to make sure we highlight. Thank you again for this very enlightening session.
Thank you, Reem. Timothy McBride.
Hard to follow my colleagues, but I appreciate it, and I also want to thank the ICER team and the staff and our leadership, Jill and Sarah. Thank you for that, and particularly our patient expert, Judy, for her contributions. My thoughts go to I was struck a bit by Eric's comment in going to the issue of empathy. So for much of my life, we both subsidized tobacco and we taxed it at the same time. And I talked about that in a lot of my economics classes. Think about how stupid that is as a policy choice. So what the heck are we doing? We need to have some empathy for what we have done here in our policy world and how stupid policy can sometimes be. And, I also, so thinking about incentives and some of the disparities, I brought that up several times in the access issues. It was brought up in the policy roundtable. And I think it's also important to think about the difference between policy as written and as passed and how it's implemented and it's regulated. So I think there's goals of policy, but sometimes it's not always seen in the real world. So, and I think I also want to end with Judy's comment, which I wrote into the chat. I trust the data. I don't care where it comes from. I think that should end up in the report somewhere. So thank you, Judy, for that. So
thank you, Tim. David.
Yeah, thank you. It's really grateful for everyone's perspective in another wonderful sessions. And then I think one key takeaway for me is that I keep coming back to like policy around discussions that although as a panel, it's a foundational to understand intervention level effectiveness and value. But at times, sometimes to me at least, it's more important to think about how to design the right policies to deliver right interventions to the right patients at the right moment. And then I think that there is a lot of lack in the evidence. So
I think that at least as much as we like to have a better interventions, working intervention per se, we also may need a better evidence on like, what is the really effective policy designs. Does like first line therapy is better than like second line therapy, or the putting cost sharing without like cost sharing is better. So lots of kind of evaluations of different policies on this intervention may need the more research is needed. So that's my takeaway.
Thank you for that. I see that I don't know if Don is able to take his mute off, but I can read what he put in the chat if you'd like. Don, are you available? I don't know if you, since not everybody can see this, I will say that he agrees with the panelists that there has to be sensitivity to the clinical context, the setting, and the specific targeted populations for an integrated approach for each of those. The cost effectiveness ratio has to shift. I think it's the cost effectiveness ratio. I think that's what he's referring to identifying the combined interventions of meds, counseling, digital adjunct therapies, vulnerability, age, etc., supported by team-based care and shared decision-making that has an actual impact on health, not just the habit. Incentives should not just be guessing at what will stick to the wall. Cost-effective research, not ratios, what he was referring to. Thank you. Okay, I'm the last one, so I will say thank you to everyone. Judy, thank you for your insight. We appreciate you being willing to come and say, it's kind of hard in a group in an audience like this, or maybe any audience. Jeff and King Ho, thank you. That was excellent. As usual, work from ICER. Sarah, thank you, and thank the whole staff of ICER. Thank you for having me, and appreciate your patience today. And
That's
thank
great.
you.
Jill, excuse me, thank you. And Kurt, as we finalize, we lost all but like we heard you except for the very last thing you wanted to say. I'm happy to have you finish your sentence now that your internet is back.
Oh yeah, sorry about that. I'm sure I can't add a lot to what's already been said, but the more therapeutic options that we have for smoking cessation, the better.
Yeah.
And fair pricing and access can make this a win-win, so that we can meet people where they're at. That's all I had to say.
That's perfect.
Thank you.
Kurt, thank you. So as we wrap up, my deep gratitude to the Midwest CEPAC, to Jill for chairing another successful and fantastic meeting. And we will be working to finalize. Sorry, David, did you have one thing before we wrap up? Yeah. Oh, are you waving? Sorry, that was more of a wave than a hand raise. Okay, got it. Sorry. Let's put up the last slide for everyone to know where we're headed with our finalization of this report. We will post the meeting recording next week. We will summarize the policy roundtable and make any other adjustments to the report. We're going to find a place to say, I trust the data. I don't care where it comes from. We're going to have a Judaism in there somewhere. And we expect to post the final report on or around February 12th. Everything is available on the ICER website. So as we wrap up today, just one more thank you to everyone participating, everyone staying with us for the day, and everyone's commitment to try and get us to a more affordable healthcare system. Thank you all so much. Have a great day.
Bravo. See you later.